Of course, about this interview. And this first question comes from Twitter from Mel USC 78. And Mel asks, how damaging is this interview recording for the defense? Seems to tie things together clearly for the prosecution. Ronnie, what are your thoughts? Do you think that this police interview of Alex Murdaugh, little more than 2 months after the homicides, is doing something for the prosecution, playing it here at the end of the prosecution's case?
Yeah, I definitely do. You know, in a perfect world, your defense client never would have spoken at all. And the question's been posed, does he testify, which I think would be absolute suicide if he did. But we have his testimony. Effectively, he's given multiple statements. This one, I don't understand at all. This one is voluntary. It's months after. You know, maybe before the jury, you could explain away some of the emotion of the night when he's describing what he saw. But he's had time to think about this, and it's very bothersome that he doesn't know his timeline. This is a lawyer. He keeps trying to turn the interview away from him and turn it into an interview of the police. That seems clear. He's trying to verify his positions before he takes one. And then he's had a couple of major gaffes. His timeline is off. He has forgotten about the video that took place. And the biggest gaffe that I heard was I thought I heard him say that he had not been at the kennels, that he'd gone back to bed and had taken a nap, which we know demonstrably not to be true. Not only is it not true, but he's there in very close proximity to the time of the murder. So, yeah, I think this is great stuff for the state. Maybe this is the thing that pushes Alex onto the stand to try to explain all these inconsistencies.
And I know people, you just said you think it would be suicide for him to do that. Other people have said that they cannot see that happening, but I almost feel like he kind of has to explain the kennel stuff, because that is a huge piece of this. We have a video at 8:44 p.m. taken by Paul Murdaugh that shows that Alex Murdaugh's voice, we've had 7 people say it on the stand now, and we've had his own attorney say, yeah, that's his voice there. He's down there at the kennels right before the murders take place. So what the heck is he doing down there? And 2 months later, he knows Rogan Gibson, Linda, has said that he heard him down there on the phone, at least. The kennel video wasn't back yet. So, I mean, what's going on? I mean, shouldn't, Linda, he be saying, yeah, you know, I was down there?
Except that he had kind of hardened his position, because he already said it several times before that he had not been down at the kettle. So he's not about to change, which is why I think he's asking the prosecutor, not the prosecutor, the agent, you know, what do you have? What substance do you have? He was interviewing them. Just like many defendants in an interview, they try to find out what the police have so they can then kind of, you know, change their position. And I really did think for the last 2 days that the prosecution, for all their blunders in presentation and making it boring and having no theme, really kind of brought it to a head with this interview of Alex Murdaugh, and finding, and I just said it, Anjanette, on the air, that finding out all the other shotguns were loaded with this birdshot, buckshot situation. You know, that's how all the family shotguns were loaded. Made it very clear that this was a gun from this house. This wasn't just somebody off the street who came in to kill Maggie and Paul at, you know, just before 9 o'clock on the evening of June 7th.
Yeah, and I thought that was interesting too, because we had heard that, you know, early in the trial, I had received some questions from people on Twitter saying, didn't they use different kinds of ammunition? And apparently that's what it is. It's birdshot and buckshot, both in these shotguns. You know, I guess to each his own. Here's a good question I really like. And, you know, I was going to throw this one at you, Linda, so I will right now, and then I'll get back up to Gigi. Annie12726 from Twitter asks, his statement where he says he thought Maggie was shot first due to her headshot, I found that interesting. Your thoughts on that is appreciated. You know, maybe I'll ask everybody about this one. Linda, I thought that was really wild that he brought that up. So is this a circumstance where maybe the defendant is saying something that's basically telling us the truth about what happened, or just something that maybe he maybe that's really what he thought.
Well, no, I think it's the setup of the defense. I was intrigued by the cross-examination of the medical examiner on the head wound, trying to make the entrance wound the exit and vice versa. The only way I can see that would be important is that Alex Murdaugh and his defense are going to say that perhaps Paul killed his mother in a murder-suicide, right? And then he shot himself. And then, in that case, they would have to put Alec on the stand, wouldn't they? Because they'd have to say, I came and I cleaned up the scene, I took the guns away because I didn't want the legacy of my son to be that he had killed his mother and the family.
Yeah. One thing I think is so interesting, too, and something we heard, Gigi, the whole thing, and this kind of goes to, Paul's legacy, what Linda just mentioned. Gigi, he's so concerned, at least yesterday, according to his aunt, that Alex Murdaugh's concern was clearing Paul's name in the boat crash. It didn't seem to be his number one concern was not, I need to find out who killed my wife and son. I just think that's so wild. Do you have any thoughts on that, just sitting in that courtroom and listening to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it was my thought too, which is you're just freshly off this double homicide and you're not worried about trying to find out who did it, but more than clear your son's name, who really at that time, I mean, yeah, I know the insinuation was maybe this was related to the boat crash, but yeah, I mean, I agree. It was such a backward statement. Why is that your priority when there's supposedly somebody targeting your family walking around out there?
Or maybe you think if you clear your son's name, all your financial mess goes away and you don't have to pony up $10 million or $30 million from Mallory Beach's family. That just kind of entered my mind too. We are taking your questions as we always do, so keep them coming to us on Twitter and in the YouTube chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Let's get to our next question. Jody Cato Cunningham from Facebook. Why would he call his brothers first and not his other son if he was so worried about a revenge killing? He didn't call Buster until hours later. Ronnie, I found that interesting that on the body camera footage that was released to the public just this week, after it was shown in court a couple of weeks ago, he's calling Randy. You see him on the phone. He's like, oh, it's my brother Randy. And he's not called Buster. He's not called, Marion Proctor, Maggie's sister. Randy takes care of all of this. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I agree totally. That part of the case is problematic, I believe, for the defense. Not just that he didn't call Buster that night, but from that day forward, Buster is left to walk freely. And, this is your last surviving son. If you really do believe there's someone out there with a vendetta who's hunting and killing Murdaughs, there seems to be no effort whatsoever to protect Buster. So it fits in Marion's dialogue that she thought his priorities were misaligned here. And it makes little common sense. Ultimately, the jury's going to fall back on what makes the most common sense. Makes no common sense at all if you truly believed that there's a Murdaugh killer on the loose, that you take no effort whatsoever to protect your only surviving son.
Yeah, I found that astonishing. And why Paul and Maggie? Why not the whole family? I mean, or why wasn't Alec killed if you're looking to avenge this? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Carol Heister from Facebook asks, does anyone think the theory of two shooters is the best way to sow reasonable doubt to the jury? Linda?
Obviously, that's what the defense has to go on, because I don't think they're going to say a murder-suicide, but you never know. But that there was two shooters, and that's why there's two separate guns. The problem you have is that, as I said before, you don't usually get DNA with long-shot guns. However, there's no indication that anybody else was there at the scene. And everyone says, well, the other way to sow like a defense reasonable doubt is, why would a father blow his son's head off? And the defense has been very graphic about the child's brain being on the ground. But when you kill somebody, you don't necessarily expect that to happen, because you're not, this is not a movie, right? And you wouldn't expect maybe that Paul had turned his head away from the gun, and that's the effect. So it's just, we see family members being killed every day by people supposedly love them. It doesn't surprise me that could happen.
All righty. And we've got one more question before we take a break. Gigi, I'm wondering what you think of this. Ginger Merritt from Facebook. What would Alex's life look like today if Paul and Maggie were not married? Would he have to? Oh, okay. I think it means if Alex and Maggie were not married, he would have had to pay millions for Paul's defense. Paul would have to go to jail, and/or a huge settlement would have to be paid to victims of the boat crash. So financial crimes would have been exposed. He would be disbarred and fired. What do you think about that, Gigi? What would Alex's life look like today if Alex and Maggie were not married? I don't know. I mean, I think he might be in a really bad spot.
He might be in a bad spot, and I think he probably would still be awaiting trial, but maybe not for double murder. Because the financial crimes were coming out. I mean, the worms were crawling out of the can. So I think that it was just a matter of time before all of this had legal ramifications for Alec as far as the financial crimes, and for Paul. I think there were so many eyes on this boat case, and there was so much backlash in the community. I'm not convinced, had Paul not been murdered, that he would have gotten off of this. I think he would have faced some consequences, which would be prison time. So very different, but, I still think for Alec, jail.
Yeah. Most definitely. He was going to be in a world of hurt, in the soup, as they say. So keep the questions coming to us on Facebook, Twitter, and in the YouTube chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. But for now, we have to take this break. If you're watching on YouTube, stay with us. It'll just be a few minutes. We'll be right back. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching Law and Crime.